In Georgian Ireland, respect was not given freely. It was earned through birth into the right families, through ownership of land, through adherence to Protestant faith, through speaking English with the proper accent. For an enslaved African, respect was impossible. The entire system of slavery depended on denying enslaved people the very possibility of respect. They were property, not persons whose character or achievements could command regard. But in County Cork, something extraordinary occurred. Kofi, an enslaved African who arrived in Ireland around 1799 as property of William Radcliffe, rose from absolute powerlessness to a position that commanded a form of respect. However contested, however reluctantly given, he managed an estate for years. He married Eleanor Radcliffe, a widow of the Anglo-Irish gentry with auburn hair and skin pale as Irish snow. He wielded authority that enslaved people were supposed to be incapable of exercising. From slave to respected man, the rise should have been impossible, but it happened. How did an enslaved African rise to command respect in Ireland? And what does this impossible rise reveal about the nature of respect itself? This is that story. To understand Kofi's rise, you must first understand his starting position, a position defined by absolute absence of respect. Kofi arrived in County Cork, Ireland, around 1799. He had been born in West Africa, with an Akan name that connected him to family and cultural traditions. But he had been captured, sold into the transatlantic slave trade, reduced from person to property, transported across the Atlantic and brought to Ireland by British merchants. He entered the household of William Radcliffe, a Protestant landowner whose grey stone manor house overlooked tenant farms and rolling green hills. His role was enslaved domestic servant, tending fires, maintaining the library, assisting with correspondence. His legal status was property. He was owned by William Radcliffe with no rights, no legal personhood, no standing in society or law. But more than legal status, Kofi's position was defined by complete absence of respect. Respect in Georgian Irish society meant recognition of a person's character. Achievements or standing, it meant deference to their judgment, acknowledgement of their authority, regard for their opinions and choices. Enslaved people, by the very nature of slavery, could not receive respect. To respect an enslaved person would be to acknowledge their personhood, their intelligence, their judgment, their humanity, and slavery depended on denying precisely these qualities. When Kofi entered rooms in the Radcliffe household, his presence was not acknowledged with the courtesies that would be extended to a person of standing. When he completed tasks, his competence was not praised because competence was expected from tools. Not admired in persons. When he was present during conversations, his understanding was not assumed because enslaved people were supposed to lack the capacity for complex thought. He was visible physically. His dark African skin created stark contrast with the pale Celtic complexions of the Irish population, making him impossible to overlook in any room. But socially, he was invisible. His presence did not command regard or acknowledgement. He existed to serve, not to be respected. This was the norm. This was how the system functioned. Enslaved people throughout the British Empire lived without respect because respect would have contradicted the fundamental premise that they were property rather than persons. In the Radcliffe household, Eleanor, William's wife, a woman with auburn hair and skin pale as Irish snow, treated Kofi differently than these norms prescribed, though the historical record gives us only glimpses of this. During William's frequent absences, Eleanor relied on Kofi for more than simple obedience. She recognized intelligence in him. She taught him to read. Conversations developed between them. This was not yet respect in any full sense. Eleanor still owned Kofi. She still held absolute legal power over his fate. The fundamental inequality remained, but something was developing that would later become the foundation for Kofi's rise: recognition of capability, acknowledgement of intelligence, the beginning of regard that would eventually transform into something approaching respect. For 3 years, from 1799 to 1802, Kofi's position remained defined by absence of respect. He served, he obeyed, he existed as property exists, useful but not regarded, present but not acknowledged as a person whose character or judgment mattered. And then, in October 1802, William Radcliffe died. And the possibility for Kofi's rise began. But beneath the surface of this seemingly ordinary household, something was developing that would challenge every assumption the Anglo-Irish gentry held about power, race, and the natural order of their world. October 1802 brought William Radcliffe's death, recorded in parish registers as sudden illness following an accident. With William's death, the structure that had defined Kofi's powerless position collapsed, creating possibility for rise. Eleanor, now a widow, faced choices. She could sell Kofi as estates typically sold enslaved property to settle affairs. She could accept male supervision as widows were expected to do. She could remarry appropriately to restore proper male authority. Instead, Eleanor made different choices that would enable Kofi's rise from enslaved property to something approaching respected status. She chose not to sell him. More than that, she chose to elevate him. Estate records from late 1802 and 1803 show that the Radcliffe property continued to function smoothly. But the person managing it alongside Eleanor was Kofi, not as a simple servant following orders, but as someone whose judgment Eleanor trusted, whose capabilities she recognized, whose partnership she relied upon. This was the beginning of Kofi's rise, from servant who obeyed to partner whose counsel mattered, from property who was used to someone whose intelligence was acknowledged and utilized. Tenants began reporting that they dealt with Kofi on estate business, that he collected rents in Eleanor's name, that he negotiated lease terms, that he traveled to Cork City conducting commerce. For the first time in his years in Ireland, Kofi was exercising authority, and authority, however contested, commands a form of respect, even if given reluctantly, even if accompanied by resentment, even if those who give it wish they did not have to. Irish Catholic tenants had complex reactions to dealing with Kofi as estate manager. Some found him fair in ways that Anglo-Irish agents often were not, willing to negotiate lease terms, less arbitrary in rent collection, more understanding of the precariousness of tenant life. This fairness, demonstrated consistently over time, earned a form of respect from those who benefited from it. Others resented him intensely. They were conquered Irish dealing with an African who had somehow risen above them in the hierarchy. Their ancestors had owned the land they now rented, land stolen through British conquest. And now an enslaved African collected their rents. The indignity was too much for some, but even resentment contains within it a form of acknowledgement. To resent someone's authority is to acknowledge that they possess authority worth resenting. Kofi was rising from invisibility to visibility, from powerlessness to power, from absence of respect to contested respect. The Anglo-Irish community found Kofi's rise intolerable. He was supposed to remain property. Its rise violated every assumption about racial hierarchy, about the natural order, about who could and could not command authority in Irish society. They pressured Eleanor to dismiss him, to appoint a respectable male steward, to ensure Kofi's rise was reversed and he returned to proper invisibility. But Eleanor refused, and Kofi continued to rise. He demonstrated competence in estate management day after day. The property remained profitable, Tenants were not evicted at rates typical of other estates. Necessary maintenance was completed. Debts were paid promptly. Competence demonstrated consistently. Commands respect, even from those who desperately do not want to give it. Even those who believed Africans were naturally incapable of complex management had to acknowledge, however grudgingly, that Kofi was managing the estate effectively. This was not yet the full respect that birth into the right family or ownership of land would command. It was contested, reluctant, often accompanied by the insistence that Eleanor must really be making the decisions while Kofi merely carried them out. But it was more than the absolute absence of respect that had characterized Kofi's position as enslaved property. He was rising, and the rise was undeniable, however much society wished to deny it. And then Eleanor made a choice that would complete Kofi's rise in the most dramatic way possible. And then, in the autumn of 1802, everything changed. As 1803 turned to 1804 and then to 1805, Kofi's rise continued through the partnership he formed with Eleanor. They were seen walking the estate together, not as mistress and servant, but side by side, discussing tenant matters, planning repairs, making decisions jointly. They sat together in the library examining books and estate accounts. They worked together on the complex matters of managing 300 acres and the families who depended on that land. A partnership was forming that went beyond the practical necessities of estate management. According to fragmentary accounts, Eleanor and Kofi shared intellectual interests, conversed about books, developed genuine respect for each other's judgment and character. This was different from the simple acknowledgement of competence that tenants might give an effective estate manager. This was mutual respect between partners, recognition of intelligence, character and capability that transcended the legal inequality that technically still defined their relationship. Eleanor, constrained by her gender within patriarchal society, found in Kofi someone who recognized her intelligence and capability. Kofi, constrained by his race and enslaved status, found in Eleanor someone who recognized his humanity and potential. The partnership was not between equals in legal or social terms. Eleanor still owned Kofi, still held absolute power over his fate, still could have sold him at any moment if she chose. But in the daily practice of their working relationship, in the conversations they shared, in the mutual reliance that developed, there was a form of equality, a mutual respect that society insisted could not exist between owner and owned. This partnership enabled Kofi's continued rise. Eleanor's regard for him was visible to the community. When she consulted him openly, when she defended his authority to manage estate business, when she relied on his judgment, she was demonstrating respect that others found shocking, but which they could not entirely dismiss. The Anglo-Irish establishment remained horrified. To them, Kofi's rise represented the collapse of every hierarchy they relied upon. If an enslaved African could command respect through demonstrated competence and partnership, what did that say about the supposed natural order? If property could rise to become a respected partner, what were the boundaries that kept society stable? They intensified social pressure on Eleanor. Letters expressing concern became more urgent. Social ostracism became more complete. The message was clear: reverse Kofi's rise or face complete exclusion from the society that should be yours. But Eleanor had decided that Kofi's respect and partnership mattered more than society's approval. She chose to continue enabling his rise despite the cost to her own social standing. And Kofi continued to demonstrate why he deserved the respect Eleanor showed him. He managed the estate effectively. He treated tenants fairly. He navigated the complex social dynamics with intelligence and skill. He proved day after day that the racial ideology insisting Africans were incapable of such work was simply wrong. By 1806, Kofi had risen from enslaved property to effective estate manager, from invisible servant to visible partner, from someone denied all respect to someone whose competence and character commanded recognition even from those reluctant to give it. But the rise was vulnerable. It depended entirely on Eleanor's choices and protection, and it remained contested. Society still insisted Kofi should not be respected, that his rise was unnatural and improper. And then Eleanor made the choice that would complete Kofi's rise and formalize his position in the most dramatic way possible. She married him. What Eleanor did next would shock the county, though they wouldn't fully understand it for years to come. In April 1806, Eleanor and Kofi traveled to St. Brigid's, a small rural church, and were married by Reverend Thomas Kearney. The register lists the groom as K. Freeman, Freeman of Cork. Marriage formalized Kofi's rise in the most complete way Georgian society could recognize. Marriage was not merely a personal relationship, but a legal and social institution that conferred status, rights, and standing. When Eleanor married Kofi, she was formally recognizing their partnership, making public the mutual respect that had developed between them, and declaring that Kofi deserved recognition as her husband and partner rather than remaining invisible property. After April 1806, Kofi lived in the manor house not as a servant, but as Eleanor's husband. He managed the estate not as property exercising delegated authority, but as a husband with legitimate standing to do so. He attended church, sitting in the Radcliffe family pew, that physical marker of social position and respectability. The rise from enslaved property to husband of an Anglo-Irish widow was complete. From someone who commanded no respect to someone whose position in Eleanor's household and in church demanded acknowledgement. But the respect remained contested in complex ways. The Anglo-Irish establishment never accepted the marriage as legitimate. They completely ostracized Eleanor and Kofi. They refused to extend social courtesies. They insisted that Kofi remained unworthy of respect, regardless of his position or Eleanor's choices. Their ostracism was itself a form of acknowledgement, though. You do not need to ostracize someone who is truly invisible. The Anglo-Irish gentry's intense effort to deny Kofi respect was proof that his rise had been real enough to threaten them, that his position commanded enough regard to require active suppression. Among Irish Catholic tenants, reactions varied. Some respected Kofi for his fair treatment of them, for his understanding of their precarious situations, for his management that was less arbitrary and cruel than many Anglo-Irish agents. They dealt with him as an authority figure whose decisions mattered, whose word could be trusted, whose character merited regard. According to oral histories preserved by tenant families, some referred to Kofi with terms of respect, acknowledging his authority and fairness, even as they might have questioned or resented the broader situation of an African managing Irish land. Others never respected him, viewing his entire position as an affront to Irish identity, to their own dignity as conquered people now dealing with an African risen above them, to every understanding they had of how power and respect should be distributed. In Cork City, merchants and tradesmen dealt with Kofi on estate business. Many refused to show the deference they would give an Anglo-Irish gentleman, but they conducted business, negotiated terms, fulfilled contracts. The commercial interactions required a form of acknowledgement of Kofi's authority to make decisions and commit the estate's resources. The respect Kofi commanded after the marriage was thus complicated and contested. Not universal, not unqualified, not the automatic regard that birth into the Anglo-Irish gentry would confer. But it was real. For 14 years, from 1806 to 1816, Kofi occupied a position that commanded forms of respect, from some tenants who appreciated fair treatment, from merchants who dealt with him commercially, from the broader community that had to acknowledge his authority even while many wished to deny it. He proved that respect could be earned through demonstrated competence and character, that it need not depend solely on birth or race, that an African could rise to command regard even in a society structured to make such rise impossible. The rise was incomplete and vulnerable. It depended on Eleanor's continued existence and choices. When she died, everything would collapse. But while it lasted, Kofi's rise from slave to respected man was undeniably real. Kofi had, in effect, taken his master's place. But in Georgian Ireland, such defiance always carried a price. For 14 years, from 1806 to 1816, Kofi lived as a respected man, though the respect was contested, incomplete, and dependent on circumstances that would prove temporary. The daily realities of his life demonstrated both the reality of his rise and its limitations. He managed the Radcliffe estate with authority that extended over tenant families. When he made decisions about rents or leases, those decisions were implemented. When he authorized repairs, tradesmen completed the work. When he negotiated business in Cork City, his agreements were honored. This practical authority, the ability to make decisions that others implemented, to give instructions that were followed, to commit resources that were then committed, this is a form of respect. People follow the decisions of those they respect as having legitimate authority. Estate records suggest the property remained profitable during Kofi's management. Tenants were not evicted at rates typical of other estates in periods of economic difficulty. Necessary maintenance was completed. The estate functioned smoothly. This consistent competence over 14 years would have earned respect from pragmatic observers. Whatever their prejudices about Africans or objections to Kofi's position, the evidence of effective management was undeniable. According to oral histories collected later from tenant families, some referred to Kofi with phrases that indicated regard for his fairness. When crops failed and rents could not be paid, Kofi was willing to negotiate. When tenants faced particular hardships, he showed understanding. When disputes arose, he mediated with more even-handedness than many Anglo-Irish agents demonstrated. This fairness earned a form of respect that transcended the racial prejudices many tenants lightly held. Respect based on character and fair dealing rather than birth or race. In church on Sundays, Kofi sat in the Radcliffe family pew beside Eleanor. This weekly public appearance, in a position of respectability, in the pew reserved for a landowning family, visible to the entire congregation, was a constant assertion of Kofi's risen status. Other families maintained distance. They refused to greet Eleanor and Kofi after services. They demonstrated their disapproval through cold shoulders and averted eyes, but they did not attempt to physically remove Kofi from the pew. They did not challenge his right to sit there in ways that would have created public scenes. The passive disapproval, rather than active confrontation, suggests a reluctant acknowledgement that Kofi's position, however much they hated it, had some legitimacy they could not entirely deny. Kofi's appearance itself commanded a form of respect through the stark contrast it created. His dark African skin against the pale Celtic complexions of the congregation. His presence in the position that William Radcliffe had once occupied, this visual contrast was impossible to ignore and forced acknowledgement of his rise even from those who wished to deny it. He dressed appropriately for his position, not in servant's clothes, but in the attire of a gentleman who managed property. His comportment demonstrated education and refinement. His English was fluent and sophisticated. Every aspect of his presentation challenged the stereotypes that insisted Africans were suited only for servitude. This consistent demonstration of capability, refinement, and fair dealing over 14 years would have earned Kofi respect from at least some portion of those who interacted with him regularly, even if that respect was given grudgingly, even if accompanied by resentment or confusion about how to reconcile his evident capability with their racial prejudices. But the respect remained incomplete and contested. High society never accepted him. Many tenants never overcame their resentment. The broader community never fully embraced his risen position, and the respect remained vulnerable, dependent entirely on Eleanor's continued existence and choices. Kofi's rise from slave to respected man raises profound questions about the nature of respect itself. In Georgian Irish society, respect was supposed to flow from birth, from bloodline, from position in rigid hierarchies that seem natural and eternal. You respected someone because they were born into the right family, belonged to the right religion, possessed the right skin color. Kofi had none of these traditional sources of respect. He was African in a society that insisted Africans were inferior. He had been enslaved property. He had no family lineage that Irish society would recognize. He belonged to none of the categories that were supposed to command regard. Yet he earned a form of respect through entirely different means, through demonstrated competence, through fair dealing, through intelligence and judgment shown consistently over years, through partnership with Eleanor that was visible and undeniable. This suggests that respect is not as tied to birth and hierarchy as societies claim, that it can be earned through character and capability, that the natural order is actually a constructed order maintained through law and custom rather than through actual differences in human capacity. But Kofi's experience also reveals limits to earned respect in hierarchical societies. No matter how competent he was, no matter how fairly he dealt with tenants, no matter how effectively he managed the estate, he could not earn universal respect. The Anglo-Irish establishment refused to recognize his risen position. Many tenants never overcame their resentment. Racial prejudice proved more powerful than demonstrated capability for many who interacted with him. This suggests that in hierarchical societies, earned respect can take you only so far, that racial prejudice and social boundaries create ceilings that competence alone cannot break through. That respect based on character is always more fragile than respect based on birth, when societies are structured around rigid hierarchies. Kofi's respect was also entirely dependent on Eleanor. Without her choices and protection, he would never have risen from enslaved property. Without her continued support, his position would collapse. This dependency reveals another aspect of respect in hierarchical societies, that rising from powerless positions often requires alliances with those who hold power. That individual capability is necessary but not sufficient, that transformation requires both personal merit and enabling circumstances. The Anglo-Irish establishment's horror at Kofi's rise was not merely about him as an individual. It was about what his rise represented, the possibility that respect need not flow only through traditional channels, that hierarchies were not as natural as claimed, that competence and character might matter more than birth and race. If an enslaved African could earn respect through demonstrated capability, what did that say about all those who claimed respect based solely on their birth? What did it suggest about the supposed natural inferiority of Africans? What did it reveal about the fragility of the entire social order? This is why Kofi's rise was so threatening. It proved that respect could be earned rather than only inherited, that the hierarchies were social constructions rather than natural facts. That an African could command regard through the same means that anyone could, through intelligence, fairness, competence, and character. But it also proved how limited such earned respect could be in societies committed to maintaining racial and social hierarchies. Kofi earned respect from some, but he never earned universal respect. And when Eleanor died, even the contested respect he had earned apparently could not be sustained. For 14 years, Kofi lived as a risen man, managing an estate, commanding forms of respect, occupying positions that should have been impossible for someone with his history. And then, in October 1816, Eleanor died, and Kofi's rise ended in disappearance. The parish register records Eleanor's burial. Eleanor Radcliffe, widow, aged approximately 50, buried October 19th, 1816. But there is no death certificate for Kofi. No burial record, no will mentioning him, no document addressing what happened to the man who had risen so dramatically and whose rise had depended entirely on Eleanor's choices and protection. He simply vanishes from the historical record as completely as if he had never existed. Perhaps the respect Kofi had earned from some tenants and merchants was not sufficient to protect him without Eleanor. Perhaps without her he had no standing that anyone felt obligated to honor. Perhaps the community that had reluctantly acknowledged his authority while Eleanor lived now saw opportunity to reverse his rise entirely. Perhaps he was forced to leave, expelled from the manor house, driven from the estate, pushed back toward the invisibility and powerlessness that had characterized his existence before Eleanor's choices enabled his rise. Perhaps he left voluntarily, recognizing that without Eleanor, his position was untenable, that the respect he had commanded was too dependent on her presence to survive her death. Perhaps he traveled to Liverpool or London, where he might use his literacy and demonstrated capability to find work and build some measure of security. Perhaps he attempted to maintain some portion of his risen status in cities where his specific history was unknown. Or perhaps he died shortly after Eleanor, through illness, through violence, through any of the countless ways lives ended in early 19th century Ireland, and his death went unrecorded because without Eleanor, he had reverted to the social invisibility that characterized enslaved people. We don't know what happened to Kofi after Eleanor's death. The historical record falls silent. What we know is that his rise from slave to respected man lasted only as long as Eleanor lived. That when she died, the respect he had earned, contested and incomplete though it was, apparently could not sustain his position. The rise ended, and we are left with questions about whether the respect was ever truly secure, whether it could have survived without Eleanor's protection, whether earned respect can ever be as enduring as inherited respect in societies built on rigid hierarchies. And then, after Eleanor's death, Kofi disappeared from history entirely, or did he? More than 2 centuries later, we tell the story of Kofi's rise, from slave to respected man, from absolute powerlessness to a position that commanded regard even from those reluctant to give it. We tell it not because the rise was permanent. It wasn't. When Eleanor died, Kofi disappeared, and the respect he had earned apparently vanished with him. We tell it not because the rise was universally accepted. It wasn't. Many never respected Kofi regardless of his competence, viewing his entire position as an affront to the racial and social order. We tell it because the rise proves that respect can be earned through character and capability, that hierarchies are more fragile than they appear, that transformation is possible even in systems designed to make it impossible. Kofi rose from enslaved property to estate manager, from someone denied all respect to someone whose authority was acknowledged, whose fairness was recognized, whose competence was undeniable. He rose through demonstrated intelligence, through years of fair dealing with tenants, through effective management that kept an estate profitable and functioning, through partnership with Eleanor that was visible and genuine. The rise was incomplete. He never earned universal respect. The Anglo-Irish establishment never accepted him. Many tenants never overcame their resentment. Racial prejudice proved more powerful than demonstrated capability for many. The rise was vulnerable. It depended entirely on Eleanor's choices and protection. When she died, the risen position apparently could not be sustained. But the rise was real. For 14 years, Kofi commanded forms of respect that enslaved people were supposed to be incapable of earning. He proved that Africans possessed the intelligence and capability that racial ideology insisted they lacked. He demonstrated that respect could flow from character rather than only from birth. Eleanor demonstrated that individuals with power can choose to enable others' rise, that partnership can exist across boundaries society insists are uncrossable, that respect can be given where society insists it should not be. Together, they proved that rise is possible even when systems are designed to prevent it, that competence and character matter, that hierarchies that seem eternal are actually maintained through choices, and when different choices are made, the hierarchies can be challenged. This is why Kofi's story endures, not because it ended in permanent triumph, not because it dismantled the systems that made rise so difficult, but because it proves that rise is possible, that respect can be earned, that human capability transcends the boundaries that societies try to impose. From slave to respected man, the journey was incomplete, vulnerable, and ultimately apparently unsustainable without Eleanor. But it happened, and its happening proves something important about human potential and the fragility of oppressive hierarchies. To understand Kofi's rise, we must ask, who actually respected him? Who recognized his authority, acknowledged his competence, regarded him as someone whose character and judgment merited consideration? The answers are complex and reveal the contested nature of respect in hierarchical societies. Some Irish Catholic tenants respected Kofi. According to oral histories, those who dealt with him regularly and experienced his fairness came to regard him not for his position, but for his character. When he negotiated rent reductions during hard years, when he mediated disputes even-handedly, when he demonstrated understanding of their precarious situations, this earned respect based on his actions rather than his status. This was respect given reluctantly by some, given despite racial prejudices and resentment about the broader situation. But it was real respect, acknowledged in later testimonies about how Kofi managed the estate and treated those dependent on it. Merchants and tradesmen in Cork City who dealt with Kofi on estate business developed a form of pragmatic respect. They might not have welcomed him socially, might not have regarded him as an equal, but they conducted business with him honestly, honored agreements, treated him as someone whose word had value in commercial matters. This commercial respect, the willingness to deal fairly because someone has proven reliable in business, is a meaningful form of regard, even if it doesn't extend to social acceptance. Eleanor respected Kofi most fully. She recognized his intelligence, trusted his judgment, valued his partnership. She demonstrated this respect publicly through her choices, elevating him, marrying him, defending his authority against social pressure. Her respect was the foundation for Kofi's entire rise. Without it, none of the rest would have been possible. Reverend Thomas Kearney, the vicar who performed the marriage ceremony, showed a form of respect in his willingness to marry Eleanor and Kofi, despite knowing the social storm it would create. His decision to perform the ceremony suggests he regarded the partnership as legitimate, worthy of religious recognition, but many others never respected Kofi. The Anglo-Irish establishment refused respect categorically. They ostracized Eleanor and Kofi completely, insisted the marriage was invalid, maintained that Kofi remained unworthy of regard, regardless of his demonstrated competence. Many Irish Catholic tenants resented him and never overcame that resentment to recognize his fairness or capability. For them, the indignity of dealing with an African on their ancestors' stolen land was too great to allow respect. Some merchants and tradesmen dealt with Kofi only because business required it, showing him no more courtesy than absolutely necessary, making clear their disapproval even while conducting transactions. The question, who respected Kofi, thus has complicated answers. His respect was partial, contested, dependent on context. Some recognized his character and capability, many refused to do so. Almost no one gave him the automatic respect that birth into the Anglo-Irish gentry would have commanded. But the partial respect was real. Those who did respect him, some tenants, some merchants, Eleanor most fully, their respect was based on Kofi's actual character and demonstrated competence rather than on status or birth. This suggests something important about respect. It can exist in graduated forms, can be given for different reasons, can coexist with disapproval or prejudice in complex ways. Kofi's rise to becoming a respected man does not mean he earned universal respect. It means he earned sufficient respect from sufficient people to function with authority for 14 years. That partial, contested respect was enough to enable his rise. And its existence proves that earned respect is possible even when societies are structured to prevent it. More than 2 centuries after Kofi rose from slave to respected man in County Cork, Ireland, his story continues to resonate because it speaks to fundamental questions about human potential, social hierarchies, and the nature of respect itself. Kofi's rise proved several crucial truths. First, that enslaved people possessed the intelligence and capability that slavery's ideology insisted they lacked. Kofi managed an estate effectively for years. He demonstrated judgment, fairness, and competence that equaled or exceeded that of freeborn estate managers. His rise proved that the supposed natural incapability of Africans was a lie necessary to justify slavery, but contradicted by actual human capacity. Second, that respect can be earned through character and demonstrated competence. Kofi commanded regard from at least some portion of those who interacted with him regularly, not because of his birth or status, but because of how he conducted himself, how fairly he dealt with tenants, how effectively he managed estate business. This earned respect, however, partial and contested, proves that hierarchies based on birth and race are social constructions rather than natural facts. If respect can be earned through character, then birth-based respect is not the only form, and perhaps not even the most legitimate form. Third, that rise is possible even in systems designed to prevent it. Kofi should never have risen from enslaved property. Every structure of Georgian Irish society was designed to keep him powerless. But through Eleanor's choices and his own demonstrated capability, he rose to a position that commanded authority and regard. This possibility of rise, even when incomplete and vulnerable, matters. It proves that oppressive systems are not as absolute as they claim. That individual agency and choice can create transformation even when circumstances seem hopeless. But Kofi's story also reveals harsh limits. The rise depended entirely on Eleanor. Without her choices and protection, Kofi would never have risen. When she died, the rise apparently could not be sustained. This reveals that rising from powerless positions often requires alliances with those who hold power. Individual capability is necessary, but not sufficient. The respect remained contested and partial. Many never respected Kofi regardless of his demonstrated competence. Racial prejudice proved more powerful than capability for much of the community. This reveals that in hierarchical societies, earned respect faces constant challenge from those committed to maintaining existing hierarchies. The rise did not dismantle systems. Slavery continued. Racial hierarchies persisted. Kofi's individual rise, however remarkable, did not change the structures that made such rise so difficult and rare. But the rise happened, and its happening matters. Because it proves that transformation is possible, that respect can be earned, that human capability transcends boundaries, that hierarchies are fragile, that individual choices can challenge systems. From slave to respected man, the rise was incomplete, vulnerable, and ultimately apparently unsustainable. But it was real, and we remember it because it proves what those who maintain oppressive hierarchies desperately need us not to believe: that rise is possible, that respect can be earned, that human potential cannot be fully suppressed, even by systems designed to do so. In a grey stone manor in County Cork, in the constant Irish rain, for 14 years, Kofi lived as a risen man. Commanding authority, earning respect from some, demonstrating capability that challenged every prejudice of his age. The rise ended when Eleanor died, but the rise had been real while it lasted. And its reality endures in memory as proof that human beings can rise from the most powerless positions, can earn respect through character and competence, can challenge hierarchies that seem eternal. From slave to respected man, the journey proves that rise is possible, and we remember